Sup, tricksters, and welcome to another episode of Exploring Boundaries with Loki Consulting. Today we're going to talk about my favorite meeting ever, retrospectives. I know, I don't often have that big a smile on my face, and that's because I really like retrospectives. I firmly believe that if we removed all the meetings and we just kept the one meeting, the retrospective, and we did it correctly, we could rederive everything else from that one meeting. It would take forever, so it's not worth doing the experiment, but you could. Here's how we're going to break down this video. I'm going to answer the three big questions. What's a retrospective? Why do we have one? And how do we have them? Then I'm going to talk about a framework that exists for group decision making. I'm going to go over that quickly because it's kind of abstract, and the only thing that really matters is that you understand two core ideas, and then there'll be references if you want to explore that further. Once we have that, I'm going to talk about the roles and responsibilities of the facilitator and of the participants of the retrospective. And once that's done, I'm going to walk us through the steps of the retrospective and how to do each step correctly, how they all work. This is going to be abstract in the sense that a real retrospective is organic, and every team is different, and every problem is different, and everything depends on the situation. If you want help with your retrospective, I can help you with that. So reach out. Okay, without further ado, let's start talking about retrospectives. So, what's a retrospective? Well, it's a fairly standard meeting in Scrum and Agile-ish shops, software, tech, startup-y things. We basically gather as a team and discuss how things went. And that's about how well defined it is. But it can be so much more than that. I bet most of your retrospectives look like this. Hey, let's pick a topic to talk about. Hey, let's talk about the topic. Hey, let's pick an action item. Maybe. Okay, cool. Thanks for coming. See you next time. And my heart bleeds. I cry. This is just so sad. A retrospective can be so much more than that. How do we make a retrospective successful? Right? We have to answer two questions. How do you do it and why do you do it? So let's talk about why first, like the goal, right? Desired outcome for the meeting. Because if you don't have that, why bother having a meeting? The why is, as a team, we agree on at least one way to improve how we deliver value. How do we do it? We have a couple of things that are important as required qualities of the various team members, and that means the various qualities that the team must be able to exhibit. So there's elements of team health here that are very important. Here are those elements. The first element is full participation. If the team members aren't participating, then as a team, you're missing out on pain points, curiosity, and suggestions. That is one particular dysfunction to explore. The second element is mutual understanding. If the team members don't cultivate a shared understanding, the team will be unable to attain or maintain a certain required synergy to have the most constructive retrospectives possible. You also want to have inclusive solutions. This follows from the previous. If the solution doesn't include all the team members who would benefit from it, then we're not helping the team. In fact, by definition, we're excluding people from the team. The last element that is required is shared responsibility. If it's the same person doing the action items all the time, then the team's not really taking ownership of its process, not really taking ownership of its flow. You can't have the team lead or the agile coach or the scrum master or like the junior, whoever. You can't have the same person always be the one doing the action items. So everyone has to take ownership of improving the team. Let's take a step back and let me introduce this framework for group decision making. The framework I want to introduce basically suggests that we go through a couple of steps as a group when we make any decision, and here is what the conversations look like. For short, we think of it as this diamond of participation, where every conversation begins with the new topic, and then by necessity, we explore first with familiar opinions and then other perspectives, and then we get to the middle, and then we start to converge, and we bring our thinking together, and then we refine it, and then we make a decision. And that's ideal, which also means that's not really how it works in practice. It's a convenient model to keep in mind, but there's one modification you want to make to it. You're going to want to add the grown zone to the model in your head. And it goes like this. Everything is as normal. You begin the retrospective, you have a divergent conversation about a whole bunch of new ideas and curiosities and questions, and then you go through the grown zone, which is the time required for everyone to align, to build a shared framework of understanding. And then you can start to converge with inclusive alternatives, synthesis, refinements, and eventually a decision. That's it for the abstract. We're going to move on to very practical ideas now. Again, however practical they are, every team is different, every makeup is different, every team has different tools and requirements and constraints and budgets. So I'm here to help. If you have questions about how to implement these things for yourself, or if your team is struggling with these things. So how to prepare the retrospective? Well, first, here's the tools you need. You're going to need first a whiteboard with erasers. Make sure the whiteboard is clean. Make sure the erasers work. You're going to need markers with colors. Information, questions, and actions all need to be different colors. Be aware of anyone colorblind in your team. If you have someone colorblind, blue and red are going to be the same color for them, for instance. Well, not for everyone, but there's a type of color blindness where that's going to be a problem. So be aware of that, because otherwise you're losing a part of your team there. Make sure the markers work, and make sure they're actually dry erase. I've picked up a lot of permanent markers dropped inside dry erase marker holders. Speaking of permanent markers, you're also going to want sticky notes and Sharpies. Make sure the sticky notes are sticky. Make sure the Sharpies work. Are you remote? Like everyone during COVID? No problem. Here's at least 2 tools that you can use. The first tool is called Miro. It used to be called Real-Time Board a while back. It's basically an infinite digital whiteboard with a lot of collaboration abilities built in. I really like it. And as you can tell, it has a lot of options for retrospective formats. The second option is called Remote Retro. You can just type that in Google or DuckDuckGo or whatever, and it'll come up. I am a little bit biased because it was built by a friend of mine, but that also means that it was built based on the same principles I'm talking about in this video. So I recommend it as a tool to help guide your team through the process of a retrospective. Now that you've gathered the materials, you're going to add the retrospective prime directive to the whiteboard. What is the prime directive, you ask? Oh, thank you for asking. The prime directive says, regardless of what we discover, we understand and truly believe that everyone did the best job they could, given what they knew at the time, their skills and abilities, the resources available, and the situation at hand. You're going to want to put this on the whiteboard. It's important. Take the minute and a half it takes to do it, and do that before the retrospective starts. Okay, now let's talk about roles and responsibilities. First, let's talk about the participant, because there's going to be a lot of them. So let's line up what they need to bring to the meeting. The participant first needs to bring trust. This is fundamental, and it is the most important thing. Basically, everything else trickles down from trust. Trust the other team members, trust yourself. A retrospective is a time to take a look at what went wrong. It's a time to take a look at how we weren't perfect. And we have to allow ourselves to be vulnerable for this to be successful. And that requires trust. Be blame-free. This can be hard because we often associate in speech the work with the person who did it. But this is about the work, not the people. Manage emotions. This can be hard, especially if something blew up and someone was right in the middle of it. It can be even harder, yes, if it was, so to speak, someone's fault. Be careful. Manage emotions to keep the conversation constructive. If it was someone's fault, then How was it possible for it to be their fault? Remember the prime directive. You assume they did the best they could, given what they knew at the time, the situation, the tools, and the resources. Don't think about they did it wrong. Think about what happened that allowed them to do it wrong. Be curious. Even if you're convinced you know, even if you do know, this is a team process. It's not a you process. Practice curiosity, because it will be helpful when no one has any idea what's happening. On to the facilitator. The role of the facilitator is to lead the team through the steps of the retrospective while maintaining the safety of the space. Piece of cake, right? If the team is healthy, yeah, piece of cake. But a good facilitator has to be able to manage a team with emotions rising, with anger, with missing people, with people who have their own agenda and want to bring their own conversation into the retrospective. Being a good facilitator requires being very present. So here's a couple of things that you have to keep in mind as the facilitator. First, get a facilitator's hat. It doesn't have to be a hat, but the point is, you're not a part of the conversation. You're here to hold the space. Everyone in the group needs to be comfortable with participating. This is on you to manage. It doesn't mean you have to go and hug people. It doesn't mean you have to, go and fight people who are angry or whatever. It just means that you have to manage the space and the emotions and determine if a retrospective can happen. Determine what the best retrospective that can happen is. This is on you to manage. The buzzword here is psychological safety. Another thing to keep in mind is say absolutely as little as possible to give the team the maximum amount of time. Everything you say eats into the team's time and mind space. Let the team focus on what they need to think about. As a facilitator, you also have to manage time. A retrospective isn't a free pass to go play games. It's still work. It can be a complex meeting because if you think back to the framework, there's a divergent element, and from the divergent element, you have to go to the convergent element. So the conversation has to flow in a particular direction. It is your responsibility as the facilitator to make sure that the team goes through all the steps in the time allotted. Trying to shorten or skip a step can cause participants to disconnect and stop sharing responsibility for success. Anyone can call for closure, or anyone can call for moving on to the next step as participants, but you have to get the group agreement to move forward. As the facilitator, you can suggest it, but you shouldn't try to rush, or you shouldn't try to stop the team unless it really is going in an unproductive direction. And even so, you have to be tactful when you do it. You have to help the group get to its goal. It's not always self-evident how the steps connect. Sometimes there's weird edge cases, whether they are in the outcomes of the steps or maybe in the team dynamics. You have to help make all of this smooth as possible. And the last important element is, as the facilitator, let the team come to its own conclusions. You may be very technical, you may be an expert. However, as the facilitator, you are not a team member. Even if you are a team member outside the retrospective, if you're facilitating, you are putting on a facilitator's hat and you are stepping out of the conversation. If you have to say something that is outside of your role of facilitator, then you should hand your facilitator's hat to someone else, including the markers, etc., before you say anything, so that you can properly become a participant and what you can say can be properly responded to and captured. Note, if you participate even once per retrospective, you're probably doing it too often. You should participate at most once every few retros, if ever. Remember, you should speak as little as possible. Okay, so that was quite an introduction to the preparation of the retrospective without talking about actually being in the meeting. So let's go through what the meeting looks like now. First, let's look at the various steps of the retrospective as a meeting and line them up with the various elements of the decision-making diamond. Setting up the stage is business as usual. Set the ground rules, break the ice, whatever. Gathering data is a divergent zone. Everyone brings up what's important to them. Inspect data and possibly subconsciously inspire previously unknown thoughts and ideas to surface. Here, this is brainstorming, so it is a more creative aspect of things. Generating insights. Again, this is a divergent zone. Generating insights is divergent moving into the grown zone. This is where we're going to each interpret the situation and the data we've gathered our own ways and bring those interpretations to the group. And this is where we have to work to reach our shared understanding of the world. Brainstorm, explore root causes, hypotheses, visualize, discuss. And when you have that shared understanding, you're able to move on to decide what to do, the convergent zone. Right? Narrow down ideas to the most suitable one, find an action item. And then close the retrospective, decide when and how to circle back on progress. That is a lot of information in one very compact table. Let's unpack this a little bit. So, step 1. Everyone agrees to the prime directive. Regardless of what we discover, we understand and truly believe that everyone did the best job they could, given what they knew at the time, their skills and abilities, the resources available, and the situation at hand. Step 2. Check in on last retrospective's objectives. This is crucial. Keep the team accountable. Conclude experiment. Make a decision. It doesn't have to happen at the beginning of the retrospective. It's just a convenient time to do it. Next, event generation. Here's a sample set of events that may have come up from a team. You don't have to read all of them. It's not particularly important, but your eyes may be doing that anyway. Usually here, individual writing, so everybody gets sticky notes and a Sharpie, just writes ideas and puts them up on a whiteboard. It is important here to not try to group them yet. Let them all appear as they are and let them exist in relative chaos, because the next step is finding themes. This is where you're going to group the ones that make sense to group. You're not going to try to find necessarily names for them yet. You could, but before you try to name them, make sure you have groups and the entire team agrees with those groups. My favorite exercise here is called mute mapping. This is where the team will move the sticky notes together into groups without talking to each other. And if participants have a disagreement, then they must resolve the disagreement without speaking. After that, you have to choose a topic. Usually we do this by dot voting. There's various rules and patterns for how many votes each person gets and whether you're allowed to vote multiple times on a single topic. There's lots of opinions on this particular thing. I like to give 3 votes per person, and I like to allow people to put as many of their votes as they want on a single theme, so that if it is really important for them, they can sway the vote in a particular way. But it is rarely enough to outweigh the majority. If a lot of people want to talk about one thing, one person who really wants to talk about something else will not outweigh that. It will, however, act as a marker to other team members that this topic is important to at least one person. Once we have voted on a particular topic, here we have Jane on vacation and marketing made a promise. They're connected for this particular team. We're going to explore conditions. The usual exercise here is a mind map. This means that we're going to start from the core thing that we voted on, and then we're going to start talking about it. We're going to talk about as much information as we can gather. We're going to ask questions when relevant, and then we are going to answer those questions and possibly, hopefully, eventually hone in onto action items. When I'm facilitating, I will often try to hold action items back until 5, 10, 15 minutes into the exploration, because I want to make sure that we give the exploration as much time as possible. I have noticed that if action items show up too early, it will shut down the creative process for the teams. However, at some point, we must converge on action items, and once we have done that, we should pick a champion. In this case, Bob will stop by marketing every day. This is an action item with a champion. Let's take a look at a sample board. This is from a retrospective I facilitated. As you can tell, there's an agenda in the top left. There is a core element for the mind map. You may not be able to read my handwriting. This was about pull requests, PRs. In black, you have the information. In green, you have the questions. And in red, you have the potential action items. you will find in the bottom right the action items with champions that the team eventually decided to go with. And the very last step of the retrospective is the retrospective. How did the retrospective go? How can we do it better next time? The more effective you get at getting better, the better this conversation goes, the more fun it can get, and the less trouble you're going to have when you have to have this conversation, which you should be as good as you can at having. All right, here's a couple of references here. Art of Agile Development, excellent book, highly recommended. Facilitator's Guide to Participatory Decision Making, and then The Stages of a Retrospective by Esther Derby and Diana Larson, which I probably took from that same book, but honestly, I've had the image a very long time and I forgot. Sorry. Okay, well, I hope that this was enlightening. I hope you are enriched, and I hope you are as excited about retrospectives as I always am. I will always be happy to talk about retrospectives. Join the Discord and ask me some questions. If you thought this was valuable, please poke at the Patreon. And if you want to hire me to coach your teams with retrospectives, poke me on Discord and we'll talk. Hey Tricksters, thanks for watching. If you like this, smash that like, subscribe, and consider donating so I can keep making content for you. See you all next time.